So this is where the mass heat is going in. Now there are a few factors that make it a bit more complicated than it should be. If you're just bolting it straight onto a solid floor, it's really not a big deal, really easy. But here there's a few things that make it a bit more complicated. It's an old house, so there's a few things to deal with there. It's about, well, over 90 years old. The most obvious one is this is a suspended floor. Not by much, there's a couple of feet maybe below the joists, but obviously I can't put something weighing, I don't know, 6-7 ton of, you know, cob, clay and stone and so on straight on top of that. It's just going to be too much for the floor, and it'll move and it'll crack the cob and so on. So what I can do is I could just chalk up underneath the joists and reinforce them, but I'm still not, yeah, there's still a scope for a lot of movement there. If I had no choice I would, but I'm not in that situation. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to lift a whole section of floor, going to cut the joists and take out those, you know, those sections of joist completely, and then I'm going to build a solid concrete foundation that's bigger than the mass by about that much on all sides, all the way around, and that'll support the whole thing. That'll have an insulation layer then before the mass goes on top of it, but you know, we'll worry about that when we get there. So that's the first and obvious one. Another one is this fire. It's an old fireplace, it's been around a really long time. It's an old knackered back boiler, it barely works, it doesn't keep us warm. So that's just going to have to go, which is why we're going with the mass heater in the first place. But of course it's also connected to a pump, which is switched here. So there's electrics involved as well in it, and also of course there's a lot of plumbing because it's got a back boiler for the hot water system. So I've got to play around with the plumbing and the electrics, and also this stud partition wall, this section, all this material is getting swapped out. So these electrics, they're going to be basically in the mass itself, or would be. So all those electrics need to be moved as well. So I'll just keep it simple and I'll just shorten them to keep them up at my working height. But this plasterboard, this has to come off to expose the stud work and the plasterboard on the other side. Now the other side of this wall is the bathroom, which is, you know, it's really nice to have a heated bathroom, and it's freezing in our bathroom because the heating system barely works. So yeah, in winter the bathroom is just cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really attractive back face onto the mass that runs through here, and then we'll cut through the plasterboard on the other side of this stud work, and we'll have some of that stone exposed, and that'll of course be able to radiate heat into the bathroom itself, and it'll be lovely. You know, we'll actually have a warm bathroom for the first time ever. So yeah, there's a few things to worry about, especially with these sockets here, because I can see cable running across. Now the socket's opposite that on the exterior wall, and I don't know whether power runs to these sockets from there or whether it runs to those from these. So we'll have to see what we find when I got the floor up. But yeah, first things first, I've got to lift the floor, and before that I've got to take out the plasterboard. Right, I'll get going. So that is all the panelling down, and that's the floor up. So you can see it's quite a void, pretty disgusting. So I've got a couple of things to do. I need to sweep and scrape all of that out, so I've got something reasonably pleasant to be standing on. I've taken out this one board here because that wasn't doing a great deal. So yeah, that's done, but I can't take the others out just yet because even though you can see there's the remnants of a supporting wall there, it's back a good 2 feet from this edge here. So I'm going to build the wall up as I go. So I'll take some of these out and I'll leave 2, maybe 3 of them in place just to give it a certain amount of support. And yeah, I'll get the wall built underneath that. Then I can support it. Then I can take the other beams out, and yeah, I'll have a nice, easy area to work in. I can see what I'm doing with the electrics now. Now, I'm not an electrician, but I think I've worked out what's going. So that cable there runs out to the pump. That needs to just go, because I can actually disconnect that at that end. I can actually reach under. So that is the override pump switch, so I can put it on manually. All of that cabling can be stripped out, and I just need to blank off from here. And that's the section that comes from the hot water tank. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward even there. So I can deal with that. I can strip all of that out as far as it goes, and that'll all go. 2 cables go to there. coming across to here, and that's just how it ties in to the ring main. So that's pretty straightforward. I can take the cables from there, just connect them together, and I can secure that back under here where it's good and safe. And then there's these cables here, which same thing, different main, but they go up to those two sockets there. So I can just take those sockets out, again connect those together with proper equipment. It's not being roughing it up. I'm doing it properly, nice and safe. And that'll go eventually, once I've got the mass heater built, I'll lift some of these boards and I'll route that cabling around outside the mass heater, and they'll come up onto this wall here, and they'll be, because the mass will come out to here, so I can actually go for surface mounted. I like recessed sockets mostly, but that's solid wood. I'll be there forever and it won't look pretty. So I'm going to surface mount them because they're not going to be prone to anything, and I won't use a horrible plastic buttress. I'll have a nice wooden box or something. So that'll work quite nicely there. So we'll have sockets available for running cable out, because obviously there'll be a bench here, be a coffee table in front, and for running computers and charging phones and stuff. They'll be nicely out of the way. So yeah, first things first is to get the electrics done. After that, assuming all that works okay, I'm going to sweep this out, as I've said, and then I'll start rebuilding the block wall. You can see on this side, that's pretty good. And that's a nice support wall that's just to support the floor joists. So that's good and strong, but there are holes in it because obviously there's ventilation underneath to keep the floor from rotting out. So even though we're going to be blocking this section in completely, there's still space around that side and around the other side. This void runs under the whole house, so it's not going to make a huge difference. And the one thing I've got to do is I've got to put plastic over these holes here, or something to block these holes. Otherwise, of course, by the time I've blocked it in to make a nice outline, and then I pour concrete into here, that's just going to run out and fill the rest of the void, and obviously I don't want that. But this house doesn't have a damp-proof course, and you can see here under this wooden header board that runs under the joists, there's, where is it? There we go. There's a nice membrane. That's an old bitumen-based one, I think. So that's where the membrane is. So when it's damp, this wall here could potentially wick moisture upwards, and I don't want that getting into the foundation and then up into the mass itself. It shouldn't get too bad because obviously it's a heated thing, it'll be constantly driving off moisture, but I still want to minimise that if I can. So I'm going to put down a damp-proof membrane if I can find it, otherwise I'll have to improvise something that will cover this wall and protect it, just to give that separation between this wall and the foundation that I'm going to pour. And also it needs to be done underneath it, because you can see there's quite a bit of damp down there. The dirt on the ground isn't helping, it's going to be hanging onto it, but anyway. And also this really dodgy foundation that someone's built that's just for this half here, where the half was before I took it out. But you can see down in there, the original section of brickwork, the blockwork's quite nice. So yeah, that answers that. So yeah, this section here has been added more recently and it looks terrible. But I'm still going to keep it there, I'm still going to use it because it's going to have cement poured all the way around it. So it's going to be locked in place. It definitely won't go anywhere, and it will definitely be strong enough for supporting the weight of the mass and the burn chamber that will be up here. So yeah, hopefully I've got to get that done today because tomorrow's pouring down, and I'd like to have got all this block work in so that can be curing while it's raining tomorrow, and I can crack on with a few other jobs, and that gives me the day after then is meant to be pretty good weather, so I should be able to get a single concrete pour done and get this whole void filled with a whole lot of rubble and a lot of concrete. So right, first things first, let's do the wiring. I finished the retaining wall yesterday. You can see it's really not pretty, but it doesn't need to be. All it has to do is contain the concrete when it's poured. But because we're well into autumn, things are pretty cold. Yeah, it's just not setting as well as I'd like. It's still pretty crumbly. I can still feel damp to the touch. You can see the very little bits that dropped off as I was doing cementing. They've started to turn that light grey, but the rest of it is still pretty dark, so it's just not drying. So don't forget this, with it being on a damp-proof membrane, it's not wicking moisture down into the ground or anything at all like that, it's just evaporating off into the house. So yeah, it's pretty limited. So what I've done after, well actually the best part of 2 days some of this has been built. So I've got a fan blowing onto it, and I'll move that around just to keep the air circulating and just blow the air over it. And I've set up an industrial dehumidifier, which is the noise you can hear. It's pretty good. We've had it for years, it works really well. And yeah, we're running that in here, so as that fan, and that, well, it's a fan heater, but it's not set to heat, it's just there to blow air. We'll keep the air blowing over it and wick that moisture away. And this will strip it out of the air and dump it into that bucket. There's a surprising amount of water that come out of there, so we've got it all set up to max. It's all cranking, and yeah, hopefully by this time tomorrow it should have started to dry out a little bit. As you can even see on the block itself, so it's just starting to turn that light shade of grey on the very ridges of it in a few places. Up till yesterday that was all very, very, very dark grey, because these blocks have been outside, they've absorbed a lot of moisture, and it's just not curing. What you can see there, it's just starting to dry off. So yeah, we'll keep this running today, and hopefully that will have cured within, well, hopefully by tomorrow. Today's Wednesday, we've got a weather window on Friday if we're doing the main concrete pour, and that's when I want to do it. I'll move a little, I'll mix a bit of cement inside the house in a wheelbarrow. I'm prepared to do that, but I'm not going to mix the amount of concrete necessary to fill this void by hand. I'll be here for days. So yeah, hopefully that should make a difference. So we'll see. Well, that seems to have worked. You can see just down on the back wall there, it's started to go off. It's not completely cured, it won't be for a little while yet, but yeah, that's really started to dry off. So today we're doing a concrete pour. Now you can see in a few places I've done a little bit of like buttressing inside, so that as this thing fills up with concrete, and we're only going up to about halfway today I think, that weight of that wet concrete isn't going to push over that end wall. And I've done the same thing over here, because that wall there of course is pretty unsupported. It's not keyed in either side, because obviously I had to use the membrane. So effectively it was a freestanding wall on top of a membrane, so you could have just shoved it over, so having a lot of weight of concrete behind it could have been a bit too much. So yesterday I did this section here that you can see, and what I've done is I've got recycled breeze block, concrete block from a derelict garage which is next to the house. That's going to have to get rebuilt at some point, but it had enough. So rather than just send the whole lot off to landfill, we're using it as ballast in here. So what I'll do is, I've done it already here, so that when I do the rest of the concreting across all this section today, there'll be no weight at all pressing on that wall. There'll be no pressure in that direction that could send it over. And then tomorrow, probably maybe the day after, we'll complete the pour and bring it up to just below the level of these joists we've cut here. That's about as high as we want to go. So yeah, even this really rough wall will work perfectly well, because really it's mostly full of old rubble. So what I'll do is I'll put more of that in right across the whole base here, and then we'll just pour concrete just to fill in the gaps and tie it all together. And by the time we've done that on a second layer, that's going to be a really solid foundation for building the mass heater on top of. And of course it's tied in to the foundation for the chimney that projects out quite a ways, so it's sitting on top of that. And then there's all along here, there's this foundation wall here, that's proper, got a really good strong foundation on. So again, we're sitting on top of that lip, so that'll give it even more reinforcement. And actually the entire floor is concreted, we just don't know how deep. It's probably not particularly deep, but yeah, it's impossible to tell that without digging it up, and I'm not going to do that. So it's plenty strong enough underneath all of that, and with the membrane in place we won't have any moisture wicking up through it and causing problems for the mass, which there are ways around. You can build a simple stone foundation and, you know, have that slight separation. But yeah, I'd rather just have the entire mass below it, you know, protected from the damp. And yeah, so next thing's next, I've got to get the block down. So another day, I've got all the concrete poured, that's all nice and good. I had thought I'd just take the half pour out and it'd all be nice and good, and it's not at all. You see that was poured on top of really bad rubble, so I'm going to have to take a certain amount of this out and then do another concrete pour here. But what's concerning me more is I've got to take the back boiler out, and this side's reasonably secure, but on this side, yeah, to take these bricks out, which I'd need to access the plumbing, you can see that it'd leave just a very small amount. The only thing that is supporting the chimney breast at that point is this block here that's already been carved, and there's this excuse for a lintel that's just a bit of angle iron that's been embedded in the wall. It's really not strong at all, and I'm very concerned that if I carry on, I'm going to bring the whole chimney breast down. So what I'm going to do instead is, you can see there's a big void behind there, and you can even see the size of the hole that was made just to bring the plumbing in. So there's another pipe lower down, so there's two large pipes have made big holes in that side of the chimney. There's another two have happened here on that plumbing, and even here where there's been previous builds, you can see there's a hole been made there and another one here, and they're just the ones I know about. So there's very little original block left. So much as I really like to get this horrible thing out, I'm just not going to risk it, because I could risk bringing down the entire chimney breast. It's really not good. I mean, you can see, yeah, what used to be an excuse for a lintel above it, and there's cracks and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour concrete into that void there and fill that whole thing up as high as I can, get as much concrete into it as I can, and then I'm going to cement this closed again and get as much support as I can back into this column. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to brick it up to about here, pour concrete behind, then brick it up the rest of the way. Then I'll brick up, I mean, I've got to do, as well as this concrete pour here, I've also got to do support there, because underneath that again has just been done with stone. So that needs to be filled, and then I'll make it as neat as I can here, and I'll brick up this front facade as well, up to as high as I can. I'll render the whole lot so it looks reasonably secure. And when I bring the pipe in to the chimney breast here, it's going to be a really long, tedious job. But I'll rig something up and I'll pour concrete down inside that as well, to try and completely fill this section down here. So the bottom, say 2-3 feet, will be the back boiler embedded in as much concrete as I can get in there, and create as much support as I possibly can. So I'm going to make a start on that today, because I'm really not at all happy with the stability of that. So that's the real, that's the reality of working on a 1930s house. It's yeah, everything's been bodged, nothing's been done well. But normally you wouldn't leave a back boiler in, because of the nature of it, it can be a sealed box in the back full of water, and if you connect a normal heating system into the front of that again, that can explode, because obviously water expands hundreds of times to its volume when it boils into vapor. So that's incredibly dangerous. But we're going to be disconnecting these pipes here, and we're going to do the same the other side of that chimney breast that's in the hot water tank that's in the bathroom. So it'll be completely disconnected. Those pipes will be left open, so if there is any residual water in the pipes, first off we'll blow it out with compressed air so we get as much as we can out. The rest of it will just evaporate off over time. And if it did, by any reason, get too hot in the back there, there's no possibility of explosion, because everything's still open. So that's the safest option, and much as I really don't want to do it, it's going to be a really fiddly job. I've got to do a lot more cement and a lot more concrete. Right, let's get going. That is the foundation finally done. You can see the fireplace is all sealed up. Of course the fire is all still in there, like I just said. It'll all need to be disconnected, the plumbing will need taken out, but the fire itself will stay in there. But that's all filled. I've made a mark here of where the chimney goes up, when I was able to see up the chimney. So as I break into this here to take the flue later on, I'll get a very liquid mix of concrete, and I'll pour some of that down the chimney so that it will fill all of the heat exchanger and so on in the fire itself. So up to about here it will be completely solid concrete. And there's pretty big voids back in here that have been packed with concrete. I was out with a stick, I was ramming it in, and it took ages. But now this entire chimney breast, by the time I'm finished, will be solid concrete up to here, because you can see it's cracking here and it's cracking here. Now that might just be in the plaster, but I don't know. So yeah, I wasn't messing about, I wasn't taking any chances with this, because it's one of the main structural parts of the house itself. I didn't want to risk anything with this chimney. So we've come up with a workaround that should work. So that's all the prep done. And so I've poured the concrete foundation that's a good size. I've moved the electrics that needed to be shifted because they were in the way. I've completely encapsulated the fireplace, so that's no longer in use. And I've taken sections of wall off that need to come off. There's still a bit of prep to be done down this end, but I think we're pretty much good to go on starting work on the mass heater itself, the actual core of it, the burning bit. Yesterday I poured or laid a very shallow, very thin, like a 4-inch retaining wall just around to about here, because this is where we're going to put the insulation down that goes under the core itself. And it's lower, it's about 2 to 3 inches around the rest of it, because we'll use the same insulation down on that under the bench itself. But it needs to be thicker here, because basically we'll be taking the concrete from the core of the mass heater itself, which is the actual J-tube, which is interesting, because it'll actually damage concrete. That's the kind of heat I like. So yeah, that's the next step, but this video is long enough, so we'll put that in the next video. Hopefully the quail will be out of the room by then as well, because they just constantly make noise when I'm trying to film. So yeah, that's the end of the prep done.